Okay, so let's talk about your last Regents Part 3 and areas that need improvement. Naturally, the part that needs the most improvement is analysis, because that is the most difficult, sophisticated thing I'm asking you to do. And that comes in here. And a lot of people were particularly skipping the part where they actually have to engage not just with the ideas, but with the language. They skipped analyzing the actual language and went straight to just talking about how the quote reflects the central idea. But that's not what you're being asked to do. So here are the directions. And the thing they're actually asking you to do is identify a central idea in the text and analyze how the author's use of one writing strategy develops the central idea. So they're asking you to identify a central idea, but they're asking you to analyze the use of a writing strategy. That's where most of your analysis should be focused, on the language and how the language develops the central idea. So let's say we're going to analyze a simile. We don't just jump to the central idea. First we quote it, and then we analyze the actual simile itself before explaining how that simile connects to the central idea. So the first thing you need to make sure to do is make sure the simile actually reflects the central idea. If it doesn't, then you have to find something else. But once you quote the simile, your next job is to explain the purpose of the comparison the author makes in that simile. If he says the man's smile was like a tiger's, then you have to explain why that particular comparison helps the author make his central idea. Why a tiger? Why not a dolphin or a koala bear or something? Why a tiger? How does that add meaning to what he's trying to say? And then once you do that, then you can explain how that enhances the central idea. So here's one of your paragraphs of analysis. It says, one example of Kennedy using metaphors in his speech is when he is describing the younger generation of America. He says that, quote, the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. Kennedy uses this metaphor as a way to concisely and effectively get his point across. The point being that the old generation is out of touch with the country, but the younger generation knows what they want their future to be. Kennedy is able to convey his message extremely effectively by using this metaphor. Okay, so the metaphor is of a torch being passed, but at no point, what does the torch mean? What does that have to do with anything? What does the torch represent? If you're talking about a metaphor is a comparison. A torch, what is it being compared to? What is the meaning of this metaphor? You have to establish that before you can jump to the point. What is this metaphor? You have to explain it. So if the steps to analyze a metaphor are this, you have to understand, does the metaphor fit? Well, first of all, the central idea is nowhere to be found in the topic sentence or the concluding sentence. So that's missing. That's another problem here. But mainly, did this person explain the metaphor? What the torch represented? No. So that makes this weak, because if you haven't explained the metaphor, then your connection to the central idea will necessarily be weak. Okay, here's another example. It says, towards the middle of his speech, Kennedy mentions that civility is not a sign of weakness, and that the United States and the Soviet Union should, quote, explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Kennedy uses this example of antithesis because the United States and the Soviet Union can do so much more when they work together. And since that's the more preferable option, it strengthens the idea that the United States should work together with the Soviet Union so both can benefit more. Okay, there are a couple problems with this. First of all, the topic sentence is somewhat weak in the fact that it's basically missing. Because it doesn't give a central idea, and it doesn't reinforce the writing strategy. In fact, antithesis, which is the main idea, should be the main idea of the paragraph, is not mentioned until there, and then it's not mentioned again at all. So the whole focus of the paragraph should be on that, but clearly it's not. And that's part of the problem. So it introduces the quote, and then it has the quote. But if you're going to talk about antithesis, one thing you have to do is explain, well, why is this quote an example of antithesis? Where is the antithesis? Where is the contrast? Clearly, the words are probably here. Unite and divide are contrasting words. But you need to make that clear in your analysis. You need to point out that those two words create the antithesis, and then explain how that particular antithesis, that particular contrast between those two words helps the central idea. Now this stuff down here is pretty good. If the person had established what the antithesis was and explained how Kennedy created this antithesis, the analysis would have been even stronger, because I would know what exactly the person was discussing. Okay, so here's another version. Later in the speech, Kennedy once again uses antithesis to advocate for the cooperation between the United States and Soviet Union. He says, "Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems which divide us." Kennedy creates the antithesis with the words unite and divide, and those two words carry opposing feelings. The concept of uniting is often considered positive and is often the road to peace. Contrastingly, dividing is usually believed to be a negative. Therefore, by using those words, Kennedy is implying that uniting would be the better, more productive option. And that implication works perfectly with his idea that the world would be a safer place if the two bitter enemies on opposite sides of the Cold War, the US and USSR, could work together and create a more peaceful world. Clearly, Kennedy uses antithesis to make his proposal for a more productive world more effective. So this person actually dove in to the two words that created the antithesis, spent a long time explaining the effect of the antithesis. That's important. That's the step that a lot of people were skipping. And then they connect it to the central idea. This is more what you want to do. And there's the bell. Mindeman out.